Hey, Rebecca.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm fine.
How did your surgery go?
I'm fine.
Yep,
Still recovering, but I'm good.
very good, very good. Surgery's
Yeah.
never fun.
I'm sorry?
I said surgery's never fun.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
The only good thing, as I was taking a leftover pain pill from one of my daughter's surgeries to my neighbor whose back was out. That's one of the only good reasons for surgery is to have a
That's pretty
secret
funny. I didn't
long-term
actually,
stash.
I didn't pick up the pain pills. They gave me like opioids, and I'm like, I just don't want it in the house.
Yeah, you know what? We because my oldest had two surgeries almost back to back, and they gave us pretty serious stuff. So but she didn't take very much of it. So we lock all of our medicine anyway up in the house. So whatever, we kept it. And then every once in a while, yeah, I have like a couple friends who have back things, and they're like, yeah, if literally you only need like a half of a pain pill or a muscle relaxer or something, but they're just hard, you can't just go, it's such an ordeal to go and get a thing. So we kind of joke about being
You're the pharmacy.
the neighborhood drug dealer for for a half of a tablet or one tablet to make it
That's
through.
pretty funny.
So anyway, how are your daughters? Will they be at school this year? I think, right?
Yeah, so Zoe's a senior. She lives off campus and she's didn't even come home this summer. She just lives in her place up there. And Jessica has a dorm and she's supposed to be going. So here's hoping.
I know, right? I am.
Emily too, right? She went last year, so she'll be going this year.
Yeah, she was at UC San Diego. Just all of her classes were online, and then she's still there this summer. But in the fall, it's supposed to be in person classes. So,
yeah, I've heard that's up in the air still. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And we leave with Elizabeth on Saturday. So, and she's going to Whitman College. Hey, Molly.
Hi,
Hey,
how
I
know
are
people
you?
at Whitman.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she'll be a freshman. She's really, we'll see. I'm not sure she'll be able to really do it. She has a lot of mental health struggles. But we're hoping she'll just go and at least try for a couple weeks and then see if she can manage it or not. So but they are in, like, Walla Walla County is awful. It's like one of the red, level, like COVID, but Whitman is requiring vaccines not only for students but for everybody. Like, we have to be vaccinated to even help her move in.
That's good.
I'm hoping it'll be okay.
The people I know at Whitman are all seniors, but some of them are really lovely people. So,
Oh, good. Hey, Tisha, I am gonna make Tisha a co-host in case anything happens. So Rebecca and Molly, you guys are okay with sharing your screen once. I'll prompt you. I'm going to welcome everybody and say some stuff and introduce the two of you, and then I will turn it over to Rebecca.
Sounds good.
To share your screen. So I am going to start. We have people starting to come, and so I'm going to start letting people in, just so you know. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to let people in, and then we'll get started in a little bit. Welcome, everybody. We've got more people coming, so just hold tight, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started with the welcome and introductions. Tisha, if you can, I think you can admit people, right? So if you'll keep track of who still needs to be admitted, that would be great. I want to welcome you all today to the webinar. I'm Leanne Huang from Chapin Hall. I'm excited to have folks here for our first Research to Action Grants training webinar. I hope you guys can't hear all those beeps. Can you? No? Okay, good. So yeah, we're excited to have the first quarterly webinar for the Research to Action grantees and for the rest of the Child Wellbeing Research Network. It's our first learning opportunity for the newly launched network. So we're excited that you're all here to join us. Our agenda for today includes, we have two speakers for today. I'll introduce them more formally in a minute, but Rebecca Lendon and Molly Tumanik are going to present. And then we should hopefully have plenty of time for question and answer time and discussion at the end. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can use the chat or you can text me. Although if you're having difficulties, you probably wouldn't know that. So I'll put my cell phone in the chat so that folks can text if they have anything that they need. So Rebecca is going to present for about 25 minutes or so about project management kind of in general. And then Molly is going to present on a specific strategy that she uses and that she has shared with some of us at Chapin Hall. The RACI method, I think is the way you call it. That's the way I say it. She'll present for a little bit shorter, about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll move into discussion. Throughout the presentations, feel free to use the chat function for any questions or comments that you have. I don't think Rebecca and Molly can easily see that during their presentation. So I'll be monitoring that, and some questions or comments I might break in and share with them during their presentation, but most likely we'll wait until the end of their presentation so that so that we can do all that at one time. But feel free to keep them going and then we can read them out then. At the end of the formal presentations, when we move into more of a discussion and question and answer, we would ask at that time that you consider putting on your camera so that we can all sort of see each other, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. So I think that's the beginning. I think that's all the technical stuff or the housekeeping stuff. Let me, I'm going to introduce them, Rebecca and Molly. Rebecca is an associate professor of sociology at the University of California in Santa Cruz. Her research focuses on the ways that communities, educational institutions, and community organizations support young people to be healthy and successful. She advocates for and utilizes a community-engaged research approach to co-construct research and knowledge with those who can benefit the most from the research. Rebecca is the author of Rethinking Recess, Creating Safe and Healthy Playtime for All Children in School, and the co-editor of From Data to Action, a community approach to improving youth outcomes. Molly Tumanik has more than 15 years of project management experience in web and mobile application development. She has led interdisciplinary teams of between 15 and 20 people, delivering software products in the financial, healthcare, technology, nonprofit, and marketing industries. Molly takes pride in building high-performing teams by leveraging a mix of soft skills, communications and interpersonal skills, and hard skills, deep knowledge of tools to deliver on client needs and expectations. So we'll get started with Rebecca. Rebecca, go ahead and share your screen.
Great, thanks. Before I share my screen, I just want to check in with everyone real quick, see how we're doing today. Mid-August, maybe you've got kids going back to school, or maybe you're going back to school. I don't start teaching until September, but let's see. Why don't we just in the chat put one thing we're looking forward to this weekend, just for a check-in. One thing we're looking forward to this weekend. All right, excellent. Seems like everybody's got something. Going to a wedding that's been rescheduled 3 times. That will be joyous. Finishing comprehensive exams. Excellent. Okay, good. All right, I'm glad to hear everyone's got something to look forward to. Corn boil, that sounds good. Everyone has something to look forward to. I'll be going to the beach, so I'll think about all of you while I'm there. Okay, so I am going to talk to you today about being a project manager and managing projects. And as you know from Leanne's introduction, I'm not like a project management specialist, right? I'm just a professor in a sociology department. But before I was that, I worked for many years in research and evaluation in private industry and in universities. And I've managed a lot of different people and different projects. And Leanne and I worked together many, many years ago at a firm called Berkeley Policy Associates, which no longer exists. It was bought out by Impact Associates. And so she somehow remembered me as being a good project manager. I'm not sure why. But anyway, here I am today to talk to you about this. And so what I have here, I titled it Being a Project Manager and Managing Projects, because I think about project management in 2 ways. I think about it as both like the people part of it, who you're working with and what they bring in terms of their skill sets. Your teams are not bots of people, right? They're not just interchangeable parts that you can plug in here and there, but they're people with goals and skills and things they want to learn. And so the people part of it, I think, is as important as what you might typically think about in terms of project management, organizing the work, the budget, completing the project, and so forth. So I'm going to go through both of these with you. And I want to I know I'm going to need like an example that I share with you. So I'm just going to give you a little case study here of a big project that I ran. So I was the faculty director of a new center at UC Santa Cruz a few years ago called the Student Success Equity Research Center, CERC. And without going into any of the details about what that center was, just know that in our very first year of operation, the California legislature allocated $1.4 million to our campus for special projects on student success. And our campus decided to fund 24 different projects on different aspects of student success. And each one was required to be evaluated in some way by my brand new research center that had no staff. And so what we did was, and we had 10 months to do it. So we had 10 months to implement and evaluate these projects. It was really crazy. The legislature had no idea what they were doing. But anyway, the staffing that we had to work on this was, myself and a staff director of the center, Sam Foster, and then we hired some graduate students and some undergrads to work on the project. So I throughout this time, I might refer back to the project just so that I can give you an example or two from my own work about how I think about project management. Okay, so I'm going to go through 6 practices for managing a team, and then I'll have another 6 practices for managing a project. I'm going to go through them one by one, so I won't read them here. But the first one is to know your team, or if you don't know them already, get to know them. So, and what I mean by that is, what are your team members good at? Where can they excel? Like just straight off the bat, what could you plug them into on your project that they can do the work and get it done pretty easily? But then also, what skills are they looking to accrue? Maybe you've got a crackerjack data analyst who's looking to, design a survey for the first time, or is looking to do some interviews for the first time, right? So what skills are they looking to enhance, and how can you support them to do that? And some of that is about knowing their short and their long-term career goals, right? Maybe somebody's thinking about going to get a PhD, and so they want to get enough experience so that they can apply to grad school and look good. Or maybe they've already gotten their PhD and they're thinking about, transitioning or moving up the leadership trajectory in your organization. So just understanding what your staff's goals are and how you can support them in those goals, I find to be really important. This is analogous to, the finding in schools that students who are in classrooms where they feel that their teachers care about their learning tend to do better. It's sort of that same thing, but in a project management perspective where, people on your team will do their best work if they think that you really care about helping them to succeed in their careers. So on that same front, when I'm assigning tasks, I think about assigning tasks both for immediate success and also for growth. So one way I do this is I let my team members, at least if I've got 10 different projects that they could work on, I let them say like, okay, this is something I really want to work on. I'm really interested in this. And then I'll make sure they get to work on that task. And so, if sometimes that's something that they want to learn, and sometimes it's something they're already good at. But I try to build their confidence by assigning tasks that I know that they can accomplish well. But then I also assign tasks of things that they want to learn. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to assign somebody a task to help them build skills, you have to build that into the timeline, right? They're not going to get it done as quickly as somebody who already knows how to do that work. And that's important because sometimes what will happen on a team is you'll have this crackerjack data analyst and they'll be really good at their work, but then you'll assign the data analysis task to somebody who's looking to build those skills. And that could create frustration or confusion. And so it's important to be open with team members about why they were assigned to a specific task. So it could be the case that they were assigned because, it's something they're already really good at, or they were assigned because it's something they're trying to become better at. And so just being honest, it's always the best policy, right? Honesty, but just to be open about why it is that people got the tasks that they were put on, and to allow them to have some choice as well in terms of what they want to be working on. So in the case that I just gave in terms of, well, somebody who already has the skills and you've assigned that task to somebody who doesn't, maybe you can build in some internal leadership opportunities. And so you could assign someone who's already proficient at a particular skill to manage or support a more junior member of the team or a junior team. So for example, in my project that I was telling you about, I had mostly graduate students who I was working with, and we hired some undergrads, and then the graduate students would work with their own little team of undergrads to support them to do whatever work they were trying to do, whether it was a literature review or to do some data analysis. And so the challenge is, and I've learned this the hard way many times over, and probably some of you have as well, you really have to offer support if you're going to be building internal leadership with somebody who hasn't done it before. I had one grad student who's just brilliant and smart and lovely and competent. And I just thought, oh, she's going to do great. I know exactly how, I don't need to even check in on her. Well, it turned out I did need to check in on her because the undergrad that she was working with wasn't getting her work done. And so my grad student was just like so stressed out because she couldn't get her undergrad to get the work done. And she was afraid to come to me and tell me the work's not getting done because I can't motivate this person to get it finished. It wasn't her fault, but what I learned is I really need to be checking in when I'm offering these leadership opportunities to make sure it's going okay. And to offer support and guidance if I need to. And in this case, I actually had to step in and kind of play the heavy with this undergrad because we just needed the work to get done and they weren't doing it. So, when you're thinking about building leadership and you want your staff to be able to support other junior staff, think about your own mentoring and use yourself as an example for how you think mentoring should go, because your junior colleagues are watching you and learning from you, and they're learning their mentoring skills from you as you go about doing that work. Communicating well is so important when you're working with a team, and I think we all know that communication styles vary. And so some people like a lot of meetings and a lot of interaction, and other people don't thrive in that environment and they'd rather have, shorter meetings or less frequent meetings so that they can spend their time actually doing their work. And so my advice here is to meet regularly, but take the pulse of your team and see how much they want to meet and schedule accordingly. So if you're someone who really likes to meet and talk and work things out, and you want to meet 3 times a week, but your team are people who really just want to get the work done and check in with you once a week, you'll have to come to some agreement about what you think the best meeting schedule should be. And it's possible that you don't all have to meet together all the time, right? You could have a once a week whole team meeting, and then on Mondays check in with team 1, and on Tuesdays check in with team 2, and on Wednesdays check in with team 3 in smaller groups. And especially if you're mentoring someone who's leading a team, you might want to meet with that person more regularly. So don't feel like you just have to meet with the whole group at once. And that will help in the rest of the bullet points I have here, which is to set meeting agendas and stick to them. So when I say set meeting agendas, I mean, have an agenda for a meeting, and stick to the time allotments of the agenda. So if you've got an hour-long meeting scheduled, don't meet for an hour and a half, because that's frustrating to the people in the meeting room. Even if that doesn't bother you, it's going to bother somebody else in the room. But then allow staff to have input into the agenda. Of course, they may have something that they need to talk about that you don't know about. So the beginning of the meeting should provide time for everybody to give feedback into the agenda, so you're making it together. When you're communicating by email, the tendency is like, I have so much to tell you guys, I'm going to put it all in this one email, and then everyone's going to read and absorb it. And, people don't necessarily read and absorb that way. So I like to have kind of shorter emails, maybe there's different emails to different team members. And then I save it for the weekly meeting. If I have a lot of information to share, I'll just save it unless it's really time sensitive. And then this last bullet, I think, is really hard. And I think maybe one of the reasons that Leanne thought I was a good project manager is just because I respond to my emails when they come in. And I know that that's hard because if you have a big team, you could be getting a lot of emails, and maybe you're also doing a million other things too. And so I'm not saying you should be attached to your phone at all times, but at least to scan through and make sure that if there's an important question that needs to be answered, you're not waiting 2 days to answer it. That if your staff are kind of waiting on you for something, that you should respond at least to say, I see this and I'm going to think about it and I'll get back to you tomorrow, even if you don't have time to fully answer the question right then. Just to let them know that, they're not on their own out there, and that you're going to support their work for them and with them. And, sometimes maybe that's connecting them with somebody else who can answer the question. Have you ever had the problem that you've assigned somebody a task and they do it in a way that was not what you had envisioned? That's happened to me before. And so to be specific about what you're thinking and to get early feedback, right? To give early feedback. So, check in if there's an opportunity to see a draft of something or to, do peer review. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but just to provide some support to team members who might need extra help because they're doing something for the first time or because they're learning a new skill. Just to make sure that if you've given somebody a reach, a task that's a reach for them, to offer them the support and feedback they want so they can be successful. Their success is your success as the project manager. So, not to be over heavy-handed in your oversight of their work, but just to check in and make sure that they're getting the feedback and the support that they need to do something that might be new for them. So I always I've been managed by people who behave in ways that I would never accept on my team. So if you ever worked for a project manager who never turns their own work in on time, or who turns in work that they wrote at midnight last night, I find that frustrating. And so as a project manager, for me, I try to behave in the ways that I would like my team to emulate. So I turn my work in on time, and I do my best work before I share it. I try not to share things that have typos in them or are totally incomplete unless I'm waiting for someone else to contribute. I try to be compassionate, if somebody's sick or they have a family member who's sick, or, all the many different things that can go wrong, like we've all experienced in the last year, to just show some compassion and some understanding, and then be flexible, but make a plan. If somebody's late on their work because they had a family member who's sick, be compassionate, that's fine, but let's revise. When is it going to be done? How can I help you reprioritize your work so that you can get this work done? And then to be accountable to your team, right? That we're in this together and we're doing this work together. And so I'm accountable to you and you're accountable to me. And we're going to get this work done as a team. But in order to do that, we all have to do our pieces and do them well. That we're dependent on each other in terms of the coherence of our team. Does anybody have questions about that before I move on to the next 6 about leading a project? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. All right. So now I have 6 practices for managing a project. And again, I'm going to go through each one separately, but this is more about the structure of the project than communication with your team. So many of you will have a detailed project design already, what you're going to be doing, what the tasks are, what the subtasks, all the different pieces that you need to have in place in order to get the project done. And then having a timeline for when everything needs to get done. So for instance, if you're fielding a survey, right, you have to build into the project the survey design piece. Maybe you even have to build in a human subjects piece, a survey design piece, a field testing piece, right? The data collection part, and sometimes that takes longer, right? And then the analysis and reporting part. So that's like 6 different pieces for just one task, a survey. And so having a precise timeline to know if you've only got, say, 6 months to do the survey, that you can get it done in that time. And then to make sure that each of your team members has time available for the tasks they need to be doing at the time they need to be doing them. So, if you're working, for instance, with staff, they may have multiple responsibilities. And so just to make sure that your big deadline doesn't coincide with the other 3 big deadlines that they have on their other projects, to make sure that they have time to do the tasks that they need to be doing at the time that they need to be done. And then, to engage the staff in a conversation about this, I always have a project kickoff meeting at the beginning, sort of like a celebration and like excitement, kick off the meeting. And then I invite feedback on the project design, the timeline, and people's assigned tasks. And then I revise them based on people's feedback. So to be realistic, but also a little flexible, because if you have certain people that need to be plugged in certain places, you have to make sure that they're there. And you want to make sure that you've given enough time for the different tasks that have to get done. There's always something that's going to go wrong, and it doesn't hurt to anticipate what that could be in the beginning. And if you've managed a lot of projects and worked with your team before, you probably have a good sense of what some of these might be. For me, the things that always throw me off are data collection that takes longer than I anticipated. There's always one piece of the data collection that takes longer than you think it will. For me, it's reaching out to the different sites I might visit or the schools I might visit and getting those visits scheduled. That always takes 3 times longer than I think it should. Sometimes your project partners are delayed in their pieces if you're working with another org. Sometimes they're delayed for whatever reason. But just to anticipate a little bit, have some slush in your schedule, and make a plan for how you're going to address this, like what will happen if we don't get this in place by this date, and then to communicate these potential problems with whoever needs to know. So if the person who's doing the analysis at the end has 2 weeks that they're going to be doing this work, and it could be potentially pushed back 2 weeks, like that would be something you could let them know in advance so that they don't go on vacation during the 2 weeks that you need them to be doing the analysis. I said this already, but I like to have a team mentality, a team accountability, so that team members see their work as part of a larger process. And in order to do that, people have to know what other people are doing. So in my work, I always provide a lot of opportunities for peer review. Before I'll read something, I'll say, okay, why don't you each read each other's work first, or comment on each other's interview protocols or survey design, or whatever first, and then I'll take a look at it when you're done. I love to have interim milestones and share findings, like interim findings or interim experiences, at a team meeting. Like, maybe we'll have, the first 15 minutes be somebody talk about the work that they're doing and how it's going. And then we'll go into the rest of our agenda to talk about, the other things we need to discuss. But I like to build in, these opportunities for people to learn about what other people are doing, because that makes us feel like a team. We're all dependent on what everybody else is doing. And in that way, I see you have to be explicit about supporting collaboration and mentoring, again, for team members, and celebrating that we've reached a milestone. Okay, we finished our fielding our survey. Great. Let's have, a fruit platter at our meeting to celebrate, or something like that when we're back in person, right? But just to make everybody feel like they're part of something bigger than just their small task on the team. I've learned this the hard way many times over, and I don't have one way for you to do this, but I know for sure that you need to document your work and what you're doing on it. So one of the things that we wanted to do in this student success data was when you're working with an administrative data system from a university, there were like 7 different fields on race and ethnicity. There were 5 different fields on, course taking and grades. Like in the data, it was not clear exactly what it was, which of these fields we were supposed to be using, but we were providing information that was going back up to the University of the California Office of the President and the legislature. So we wanted to be really clear on how we were defining these very important categories that we were supposed to report on. And so I had the people who were programming in the data, document exactly which fields they were using and how they were using them. And, we devised a system where they could document within their code how they were doing it. And then they would write like a memo at the end, so that we were really clear on how it was done, so that if we had to go back and do it again the next year and we hired somebody else to do the data analysis, that person wasn't reinventing the wheel trying to figure out what their predecessor had done. So, we had talked about how this data should, how the memo should look. And I didn't have an example, but I sort of talked through with the graduate student researcher how I wanted him to do it. And then, we had to agree on where we were going to keep all of our work so that everybody could see what everyone else was doing, and that it wouldn't go away with someone on their laptop when they left. And so to think about common storage areas for files. Leanne really wanted me to talk about budgeting. And I know that all of our institutions do this differently. And my advice to you is figure out from your institution how they're tracking your budget, and make sure you know the person that you need to check in with about that, and check in with them regularly. The thing is you're the only person who cares about how your budget is spent. And so you need to really be on top of it and not assume that other people are making decisions and doing things the right way in your best interest. And one thing I've learned is sometimes you can, even if I can't access my budgets, like I don't have access to the information that the university stores in terms of budgets. I just get like a file once a month saying what my spending is. But because I like to track it a little more clearly, I create a shadow budget, which is I have this much money I spent on this many things this month. And so my budget that I get back at the end of the month should reflect that. And then I have something to look against to make sure it's been done correctly. But anyway, check in regularly and make sure you know the process that your org is using. And if you don't, find out about it. And then finally, how do you put it to bed? You've got to let it go at some point. But part of the planning process should be deciding when the project is going to be done so that there's no surprises, and what your products will be. And then you plan for those products throughout. Don't add a new product in the last week of your project. It'll be too hard to get that done. But if you know at the beginning that you're going to be writing a big report and a 2-page research brief at the end, then you can think about the order and who's writing what. But if you add the 2-page research brief in the last day of the project, then you're going to be up all night trying to do that yourself. And then, think about things like who's going to make this report look nice at the end, and where are we going to get the great photos that we want to depict our work, and to think about that all the way through. Make sure that you have somebody on your team that's responsible for those last minute details that really make your work shine, but aren't necessarily the crux of the project. Okay, so I'm almost out of time here. I just have one more slide, which is to say, I am not an expert on management tools at all, but there are lots of project management tools out there. If that's your thing, you will not have a hard time finding them. The things that I do use are timelines. I use Gantt charts, which is just a time by task. It's like the tasks of all the tasks and subtasks and when they're going to get done. That's a Gantt chart. I use shared files and folders like on Google Drive and Dropbox. I do a lot of track changes and commenting in Google Drive or on Word. And then, as I said, I meet regularly with my budget analysts to make sure that I'm spending in the ways that I think I am. So that's it for me. Project management and managing people in your projects. I know this isn't rocket science, but I hope that was helpful to you guys in some ways.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. You are a good project manager. That's why I asked you to present to us today. I would say we have like 2 or 3 minutes for any questions. Rebecca, I don't know if you can see somebody ask a question.
Yeah. So yeah, Tiffany, that's a hard question. So the question is, running into the problem of you've run out of time and personnel hours, but the final product's not finished. And it's not appropriate to ask for staff time outside of business hours, especially when the budget can't support that additional time. Yeah, I hear you. And that is a problem. And that's sort of like where you're tracking the budget, and the budget hours really matters. Because hopefully if you're aware, say in the month before, that you're kind of running out of hours, or if sort of 6 months in that you're spending way more time on this one task than you thought you would be, and you're sort of running out of personnel hours, that you can make some changes. So maybe if you've assigned a junior person a task and it's just taking them so long, you end up having to pull it and have somebody just finish it for them. Or if the writing process is going really slow, maybe you can yourself mentor people to write more quickly, or go ahead and go in and comment on their Google Doc while they're writing so that they can get your feedback more quickly and implement it as they're writing, as opposed to at the very end. But yeah, I've run into that problem too. And some of this is like an organizational culture issue. I've worked at orgs where the expectation is you do the work no matter how long it takes, whether it's outside of your 40-hour work week or not. And I've worked at orgs where, you know, you're done. And if it's not finished, then who's ever responsible for the project ends up picking up the slack and doing the extra work. So hopefully you work at an org that's the former, or one that has a policy or something to do when you have these personnel issues. But really the idea is to know about them early enough that you can head them off.
Thanks, Rebecca. That is a hard issue to deal with. Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? And then we'll move on to Molly. But if you have a question, I think there's time for one more question if someone wants to unmute themselves and ask it. Or a comment. I don't know if Deb is on this call or not, but Deb's rule of thumb, and Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, about responding to email.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, I've always said if it's going to take you 2 minutes, do the 2 minutes and do it, get it over with. If it's going to take you 15 minutes, you may want to carve out a little bit of time. But most things, I love the point Rebecca made about even if you don't know the answer, you certainly just because somebody could be out there just hanging out. They're really waiting. They're hanging on your every word. Just assure them that you've got it. You're on top of it. You're going to get back to them when you can. But a lot of things, if you're not going to be dwelling on it for a long time, feel very comfortable carving out those few minutes and moving it off your plate.
So one more quick question Lisa asks, any thoughts about managing people and projects during the pandemic when people are stretched thin? Yeah, you know, as someone who teaches, I have thought a lot about how to do this. And you know, my thought is that we can't expect the same level of productivity and the same really like ability to concentrate as we normally would. And so how can we do our work and do it well and just maybe not do quite as much of it? Because I don't think that we can expect the same level of productivity that we could before we were all traumatized by this pandemic. So, you know, do your work and do it well, do your very best work, but maybe there's just not as much of it that you're doing.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. We should have time at the end after Molly presents for more questions or suggestions or discussion about the topics that Rebecca's brought up. And people also can feel free to share in the chat if they have suggestions about any of these questions or topics. Molly, so we'll turn it over to you, and you can share your screen and share your insights.
Great, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. All right, jumping in. All right, as Leanne mentioned, my name is Molly Tumanik. I have been a project manager for somewhere over 15 years. I specifically work in web application development. So today I'm going to just give you a little bit of a background on general project management and some of its origins. I'll talk through some sort of common dynamics with teams and how to set your teams up for success and what to look for to avoid. And then I'll dive into the RACI matrix, which is a tool that I use across fairly large projects just to help navigate roles and responsibilities within the team. And I'll talk through, you know, when is appropriate to use one, when you would set that up, show you how to set it up and what an example would look like, and then how you can revisit it and how it can be useful throughout the duration of a project. Okay, so jumping into some project management origins. Project management is a generic title for a role that weaves tactical execution into a cohesive outcome for complex projects. So the point being is that project management exists across multiple industries and serves different types of work. While I work in web application development, project management is needed really whenever something is being done that is contributing to something else. Its origins are in engineering. So you might have seen project managers on like construction projects of various size or, home renovations, that type of thing. But the skills and processes that we use in project management can be adapted to any industry. The goal of project management is to ensure on time, on budget, successful delivery of mutually agreed upon commitments and work. And some typical team dynamics that I would expect to see regardless of the type of work that is being done. The things that might set a team up for success would include a properly defined scope, which is a combination of deliverables, time, and people. What are you putting together? How long is it going to take? And how many people is it going to take to actually do it? Communication plans. When are we communicating changes in the project? When are we communicating the status of a project or completion? Who does that information go to? How often do they need to hear it? Project plans and schedules. When does work start? When do the various phases of a project start and end? And what would you expect to see at the end of each of those? Clear roles and responsibilities, which is one of the items that I'll be drilling into a little bit deeper. And creating that shared sense of accountability, making sure that everybody feels a sense of personal responsibility and making sure that the work drives forward. Team infrastructure, which is sort of the who, when, what, and how of how a team operates. I know this was already mentioned, but some of the things that you might want to plan for are, how do you communicate? Are you using real-time chat tools? Are you using email? What kind of documents are you using or creating? What kind of version control do you have? Generally speaking, I want to make sure that my team always knows where information lives, how to get it, when it's appropriate for them to update it, and how to communicate that back out. And managing expectations. I think a major headline you'll hear coming out of today is that communication is obviously essential to the success of a project. I think at the outset of a project, just making sure everybody has alignment on what is expected of each other and at the end of the work will help set everyone up for success. And then flexibility and change management. So I have yet to ever see a project go exactly according to plan. That is totally normal. And I think having that certain amount of flexibility within a team, making sure that they can respond and sort of adapt to that ongoing change. And change management is a sort of project management principle that, you want to get out ahead of it, you want to anticipate it, and you want to communicate the impacts of it and make sure that you have a way of getting back on track. Typically, when there is change, either it would be change to the scope. So it might be impacting the deliverables, like what would be expected. It might be impacting the time it takes to get it done or the number of people involved or who's working on it. Typically when change happens, there is somebody who is invested in it and wants to either approve it or participate in the decision-making around it. So just making sure you understand what change looks like on your team and how that needs to be communicated and decided will really help smooth out some of those bumps. And then retrospectives. So retrospectives are actually we call it a ceremony in an agile methodology, where we set ourselves up for intermittent check-ins to talk through as a group what is going well on a project, what isn't going well on a project, and what you should start doing that you haven't been. And it's just a great way to sort of talk through independent phases of the work to see how things have gone, what's working. And it's great at helping build some of those team dynamics and creating that team feel within a team. And team potholes. So typically projects are going to go sideways when there are too many cooks in the kitchen. Again, the headline being communication is instrumental to success. You've got a lot of people working in parallel, owning tasks. If you haven't divided up the work accordingly, you're not sure necessarily if somebody's doing something, you might be doing something the same, you might be operating different documents, just making sure you're always talking through who's doing what and how, and that you're not bumping into each other. and lack of understanding roles and responsibilities. Again, we're diving into those items in just a bit. And not knowing when it's appropriate to bring up questions or concerns. So I know that on my teams, typically people try to hide when they don't know something because they're afraid of looking like they don't know what they're doing. I always tell my teams, if you don't know something, ask it, because chances are good that somebody else also doesn't know it, and it's better to talk through it. Lack of tracking tasks, risks, and dependencies. That generally just means, making sure that you're holding people accountable, you're anticipating some of that risk. You understand if you own something, if somebody else is dependent on you finishing that task, they understand where you're at with it and making sure that it gets done. No clear path of escalation, meaning if you need support or help or need somebody to swoop in and sort of help get you back on track, you know who that is and how to reach out to them. Improperly defined scope, again, just making sure you have those managed expectations about what the outcome of your work is supposed to be. Lack of support from leadership. If you need more direction and have more questions, making sure that leadership is engaged and informed on an ongoing basis so they can provide the support that you need. And not adapting to change. Sometimes I've seen teams be rather rigid about what is expected, whereas if there's some flexibility in place, you can work through those problems together and help get new alignment on expectations. And then not mitigating risk or forming contingency plans. Risk is an ongoing thing within a project. We know it's there, and it's important to always talk through what the potential impact is if that risk happens and it becomes an issue, and what your plan B is or what your contingency plan is. If something materializes that is impacting the work, how do you get things back on track? Which brings us to the RACI matrix. So we're diving into some of those roles and responsibilities again. So RACI is an acronym for a tool or framework that helps sets clear roles for project team members and stakeholders. When you're dealing with a team that is managing a bunch of tasks that might be rather complex in nature, and you have to make ongoing day-to-day decisions, it's just helpful to know everyone's role in advancing the work. So R stands for responsible, meaning the individual responsible for executing an activity. A stands for accountable, meaning the individual that owns the activity, approves the work, and is held accountable. C is consulted, an individual that might have information or direction that is relevant to the work. And I is informed, meaning an individual to be informed of progress and results. So when does a RACI get used? Basically, anytime there's work that needs to be divided up across multiple team members, or when there are a large number of stakeholders or partners that are impacted by the work. A RACI can be useful when you have a lot of those stakeholders that are providing direction, and they're not necessarily involved in the day-to-day. One of the things we like to call it in my industry when somebody swoops in that hasn't been involved in the day-to-day, but is actually introducing risk, we call it a swoop and poop. So they swoop in, provide feedback or direction, and it might not actually be helpful, and in fact, introducing risk that they're unaware of. And it can be helpful to set a team up for success when initiating new work, and it can be used a tool. It can be a tool to hold people accountable, or used as a fallback to help manage misaligned expectations. So when you do run into those potholes, just having some really basic conversations about going back into roles and responsibilities and making sure everybody's super clear on it is a great way to get things back on track and moving forward. And when does a RACI get created? A RACI generally gets created during project planning or kickoff. I believe Rebecca talked about that sort of at the outset of a project. It could be a pep rally. It's just sort of talking through everything that you need to get the project off the ground. At some point in that kickoff, you would probably be talking through the project scope. I believe I heard project design or plans are generally discussed the natural next step in that conversation with the team would be talking through roles and responsibilities. So putting together a RACI at that point would be a great exercise just to sort of get everybody on the same page. You would sort of identify the core team members, the people who are going to be involved day to day and actually executing on the work, and then expand that list to the stakeholders or partners who have a vested interest in your work, because you want to make sure that if they aren't involved in the kickoff, you understand their role within the project, because it might come up later on that you need to work with them or manage their expectations differently. And setting up your RACI. I've heard a couple questions around, what kind of software to use. And frankly, there are a number of project management tools out there, and they all purport to be, saving all projects from certain death. But really, I think it doesn't matter so much what the software is as much as understanding the intent of what you're trying to do with the tool. So in this case, a RACI is kind of a complex table. You can use any software to create it. You could use a napkin, you could use Excel or Google Sheets, Google Docs or Word, whatever is available to you that you could start by making a table in. And the first column is typically like a task or a scope item that you would be managing against or tracking against. And then the following columns are either individual team members or groups or partners that you're working with that might have a role or require ongoing updates on a project. And this is intended to be a dynamic conversation. So if you've already put together a project plan that you're walking the team through, you might actually have that first column populated with everything that you're planning on managing against. But then the rest of it is just really talking through who owns the work and who's doing what on it, who is responsible, who's accountable, who do you need to keep informed, who do you need to get input from to help improve the output of your work. And really, that conversation is meant to set the foundation for creating that shared understanding of your path forward on your work. And when to revisit. So I have seen this done on some projects. Proactively, you could revisit this during any regular status meeting. I use a document called a RAID log, which stands for Risks, Action Items, Issues, and Dependencies. It's just another spreadsheet basically that tracks status and ownership and due dates. And if you have that type of document where you're tracking those things, you could create a column where if you're assigning it to a person or have somebody on your team that's being assigned to the work, or multiple people assigned to the work, making sure you're clarifying their role within that document. And instead of just the status meeting, anytime you're initiating a new phase or task within the work, or at a retrospective, onboarding new team members or partners, anytime there's sort of a natural pause within the work, it's worth revisiting as a proactive conversation to keep things on track. And more often, because things always go sideways on projects at some point, it needs to be revisited because it's just not going as planned. So when you need to revisit those roles and responsibilities, it can be the backbone to getting a team back on track and getting alignment on those expectations with each other. And that is everything I had to cover. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much, Molly, for sharing that. One question. So you said you just used like a spreadsheet, just Excel spreadsheet, and just set it up. And do you across the top? Is it like could it have people's names, or is it and categories of people? Okay, I couldn't see it.
You could have individuals, you could have groups if they're part of like a same group of any kind that are working together. It works well across, like if there's different groups of people with different organizations, if you want to put those organizations in the column, or you could do both. I've seen it done that way. It really depends on how many people are involved and how many cross organizations are involved too. You could also do another layer where you have a group of people and then the actual individuals too, but it depends on how granular we want to get.
Can I ask a question? So many of us are working with practitioners and policymakers, which, you know, they tend to swoop, or projects are constantly changing and evolving. And I just wonder if you have some additional strategies on, like, first of all, how to manage that like constant evolution of a project, but also like when there are team members that are not as flexible to that change.
My first advice is always, I think, what's the phrase? Pound of prevention, or a penny of prevention is worth a pound of solution, something to that effect. Trying to get out ahead of stuff really is key. One way to handle that I manage, and I guess you could sort of set the regularity on your own, is something I would have like executive meetings. In sort of the for-profit client world, we usually have sort of layers within an organization, and we'll put together a very formal org chart. Typically there's the director level, and then you've got like a steering committee. The steering committee typically is just like the sponsors of the work that might want those updates, but have the tendency to do the swoop and poop as well. So I would actually have a separate kickoff with them to make sure that you have a very clear direction, and give them the opportunity to provide input at the outset of the project and lay that foundation accordingly. Because it usually ends up coming to the end of the project where they had all these grandeur ideas that you're delivering on something with the misaligned expectations. So whatever you can do to set those expectations up front and at the outset of the project, and then provide those regular checkpoints, and more importantly, identify the risks. So if they're providing input or direction that is introducing risk to the project, they need to understand that. In the software world, we call it managing up. You know, we certainly want to incorporate direction. Their input is valuable. They usually have a world of experience to add and have very specific direction. So that's great. But when there is a certain scope in place and they're introducing new scope or new risk, they need to understand that, and they need to understand the impacts. And I have seen in the for-profit world where you've got a contract, we also do change orders. And so if there is change that is being introduced and we talk through it and we understand the impacts, we make sure to talk through, like, if there is a time impact, we're documenting that and having that conversation with them. If there's a budget impact, we say, like, this is the budget we have, this is what was in scope. If you want something else, we need to talk through how to do that. Something else either needs to be de-scoped, or we need more budget to include it in the work. And so having that properly defined scope at the outset allows you to have that conversation later on and then document that decision as well. So communication and documentation the whole way through at very granular levels. But yeah, and that visibility. So when you've got the risk that's being introduced, I make sure to always have sort of a stoplight status, red, yellow, green, of how severe a risk is, and making sure that we're providing that transparency so that when we have to have difficult conversations later on, they can't ever say, well, we had no idea.
Thanks, Molly, for that. I think we probably have time for one more question. If anybody wants to unmute and ask a question for Rebecca or Molly. I'm going to jump in and ask one really quickly, really geared to Rebecca. Is just about the part about managing people, not just managing tasks, but how you build that into your time estimates of how much time you need for the project. Yeah, do you set specific hours for that, or how do you make sure you have time for those pieces?
That's a good question. And when we're making budgets for research projects, we often want to de-emphasize the management piece of it because the managers are usually the most expensive people, and you really want to get like the hours of work for the staff in there to get the research done. But I would say try and be realistic if you can. You know, managing a big project does take a fair amount of time, and you should be aware of the different tasks involved. You know, there's planning, there's reviewing budgets, there's reviewing staff, there's building in time for things like the conversations about your goals and expectations and all of that. And so, you know, you should have a sense of your own time. And if that's 10% of a project budget, or that's 15% of a project budget, you know, to make sure that you do actually put that in there, and that's not lost or wasted time. Your team's not going to function if you're not there at the helm of it.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. We are out of time. So thank you, Molly and Rebecca, for presenting. We will send the slides out. If you have questions, you can send them to me, or I think it's probably easy to find Molly or Rebecca's email, or you can ask me for it, and I'll share that with you. But thank you again, Rebecca and Molly. Appreciate your wisdom and your time today. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.